Hi, welcome to everyone who's joined us for this session about college rankings. We know college rankings is one of those mysteries that many of us use as our main guide for choosing a college. However, just using rankings, it might not mean that that college is the best fit for you. So we're so happy to have you join us. My name is Paula Masad, and I'm with Education USA in Qatar. And I have with me my colleague Asil, my partner here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And with us today, we have Brian Stabowski. He's the Director of International Admissions from Boise State University. And we're really excited to have him present on this topic and to sort of break it down for us. How much should we pay attention to those rankings when you're choosing that best fit college? Brian, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Asil, and a big thank you to Education USA generally for having me and agreeing to host this session. I'm very excited to talk to you all today about this topic. It's something that's near and dear to my heart because I think it's a difficult topic to understand a little bit, and it's a really important one to understand because it has a big impact, I think, for many students when they are thinking about studying in the US at a university. So just a quick background about me so that you know who I am. As Paula said, I'm the Director of International Admissions at Boise State University. I have been working with international students and in international admissions for about 10 or so years at this point. And I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to work with students all over the world. It's been really wonderful to be able to learn about and understand where students are coming from and to share with them more information about the US and US universities. So before we dive in to the kind of bulk of the information today, I want to take just a couple of minutes and talk about why we're here so that you understand why I think this topic is so important. First of all, it's really hard to learn about US universities. You know, international students are oftentimes very far away from the US physically, coming from another culture, maybe speaking English as their second or third language. And all of these things make it really hard to truly learn about US universities. You know, there's lots of resources out there to help you get that information, many things online, maybe friends or family who have studied in the US. And of course, Education USA is a great resource. I hope that this presentation will complement a lot of those other resources in helping you to think about some of the important things about US universities. Second, and related to the first point, I think that students are at an information disadvantage, you know, because of those reasons that we just mentioned. Being far away, being from another culture, maybe never having visited the United States before, that places you at a disadvantage in terms of information. And so it's very important when you're looking at US universities and thinking about studying in the US that you be evaluating the information that you're receiving so that you understand what you're being told. You understand what universities are telling you, and you can appropriately use that in your search for a US university. And finally, and most directly related to our topic today, we're here because I think rankings can be useful. You know, you will frequently hear people say, you know, you shouldn't use rankings at all. You will hear people at the other end of the spectrum say that you know, rankings are the best way to learn about US universities. I think that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Rankings are indeed telling you something, but what we're going to try to do today is understand what they're telling you so that you can understand if you want to use them, how you might use them, and whether or not they actually matter for your search for a US university. So first of all, what are rankings? This seems like a really basic question, right? Rankings compare universities. So there are many, many universities in the United States. Ranking systems are an attempt to compare them. So those systems attempt to standardize characteristics of universities so that you can make a direct comparison from one university to another, or from many universities to many other universities. And it's important to know that rankings can be organized differently. There are different systems of rankings. So you might see geographic rankings. So they could be global. You'll see ranking systems that are ranking universities around the world. You might see national rankings, so just universities in the United States or Canada or the UK or any number of other countries. You might see regional rankings. So that could be within a country. So to take the case of the United States, you might see rankings of universities on the East Coast or in the Midwest or in the Southwest, sort of those kind of sub-regions of the United States. Or they could be more global regions. So maybe you'll see a ranking of universities in Europe or in East Asia or something like that. They can also be quite local. So it's possible to find rankings of universities out there that are broken up by a very local focus. So maybe by state in the United States, maybe a ranking of all of the universities in Idaho, for example, where my university is located. Or it could be a ranking of universities in a city even. So all of the universities in New York City, for example. So it's important to know that as you look at different ranking systems, they can be broken up into different geographic divisions. You'll also find academic ranking systems. So it might be by the level of study. So maybe it's ranking undergraduate programs, or more commonly ranking graduate programs. So maybe it's ranking PhD programs in computer science, for example. It could also be by discipline. So ranking all of the social science programs or natural science programs, or by department. So computer science or psychology or philosophy, something like that. So there's different ways of conceiving of academic rankings. We can also find rankings based upon things related to campus life. So just two examples here. Diversity is one that you might see. Internationalization is one that you might see. But you'll find other things as well, maybe ranking a university's food, right? How good is the food on that campus? Or how many activities do they have? I would say these types of ranking systems are less common, but you will find these out there. And finally, I think the other major way that ranking systems are categorized is by research. So ranking systems may try to measure a university's impact of their research, the amount of funding that universities are getting for their research, or citations. So how widely cited are the research publications being produced by that university's faculty. It's really important to know that it is unusual for any of these ranking systems to be standing alone, right? So more frequently, they'll be combined in some way. So you might have a ranking system that is a global ranking system of PhD programs in a certain discipline, and it's looking at the research that they produce. So you can combine all of these different types of rankings in many different ways to make up one ranking system. And so where do they come from? Rankings come from many different organizations. Some of the logos that you see up here might be familiar to you. There are some really well-known and significant ranking systems out there that you've probably come across. You may come across these organizations' websites. You may see them hosting events. You may see these rankings on university websites. So these are some of the major sources. There are many, many others out there. This is by no means exhaustive of the ranking systems that you will see, but these are just some of the common major rankings that you might find. And it's important to know that rankings typically are produced by third parties. So they would be companies or outside organizations of some sort, not by the universities themselves, and usually not by governments either. It does sometimes happen that governments may be ranking universities, but at least in the US, that's unusual. And so usually these are produced by a third party, an outside organization of some sort. And there is not one universally accepted system of rankings. As we have alluded to, and we will talk much more about shortly, each of these might be measuring different things. And so there's not just one system of rankings. There are many, and each are telling you something a little bit different about the universities that are included in that ranking system. And that also means that there's not one best system of rankings. We frequently hear people in positions similar to mine working at US universities frequently hear from students the question, well, what is your university's ranking? And that is a really hard question to answer because there are many different ranking systems that you could point to. And so I think it's often the kind of natural response to say, well, which ranking system are you interested in hearing about? And that's oftentimes not satisfying, but as we dig into this a little bit further, you'll see why it's really hard to answer that question, because there is not one quote unquote best ranking system. So with that sort of context for you, let's look a little bit at how rankings are made. And this, I think, is where things start to get really interesting about ranking systems. So as we said, rankings attempt to measure university characteristics and outcomes, and they're trying to standardize those so that we can compare one university to another. And those different characteristics or outcomes that they're trying to measure are typically assigned different weights within the ranking system. So one measure or one characteristic has more impact on the ranking than another characteristic might. And all of that means that each ranking system is measuring something different, and oftentimes measuring something very different. So some of the common measurements that you might see in the ranking systems, you might see things like funding or endowment. So how much funding is the university receiving from any number of sources, outside donors, their government, research funders, or endowment is measuring the essentially the donations from alumni that the university has available. It's common to measure research excellence, and that can be measured in any number of different ways, but that's a common inclusion in ranking systems. Specialization. Some universities are very specialized in what they offer, so that may be included in some ranking systems. It is not unusual to see admissions characteristics. So things like what is the acceptance rate of that university, or what are the average test scores for students who are being admitted there, how many students are applying to that university, those sort of characteristics you may see in ranking systems. Student to faculty ratio is something that shows up pretty frequently. Different awards, and this usually is measuring what awards and how many awards faculty at that university have received. Like we already mentioned, internationalization can show up in those rankings. Graduate employment is something that may show up, not all the time, but it's not uncommon to see it in ranking systems. Industrial linkages. So what sort of relationships does a university have with industry, with companies or business outside of the university? And that is common to try to measure in a ranking system. And also reputation. And this one is tricky to measure, right? If you start thinking about it, it's difficult to measure reputation of something, but that frequently is also part of the ranking system as well. So with that information, we'll start to look at comparing a couple of systems so that you can see this in practice. So I've chosen two common ranking systems here. One is the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. The other is the Academic Ranking of World Universities, which is commonly called the Shanghai Rankings. So digging into the Times Higher Education Ranking, we can see that their ranking is actually made up of 5 different categories. So we have teaching, we have research, we have citations, which is research influence, we have international outlook, and we have industry income. Now, each of these is weighted differently in determining that ranking. So we have teaching, research, and citations each weighted at 30% of the ranking. So 90% of the Times Higher Education World University Ranking is made up of those 3 categories, while the remaining 10% is split between international outlook and industry income. So you can start to see a little bit what that ranking system is considering to be important in creating that ranking. Now let's compare that to the ARWU ranking, which has 4 categories: quality of education, quality of faculty, research output, and per capita performance. Of that, 80% of the ranking is made up of quality of faculty and research output, while 10% each go to quality of education and per capita performance. So when we compare these 2 ranking systems, we can start to see the differences in the things that they consider important when assigning a ranking to a university. But this isn't the whole story. We need to dig even a little bit further to understand what these categories are actually measuring or how they're being determined. So let's start to peel back the layers of this ranking system. So starting with the Times Higher Education rankings, if we recall, there were 5 categories. The first was teaching, which makes up 30% of the ranking. That is made up of a couple of different subcategories. So we can see there's a reputation survey for teaching. Faculty to student ratio is in there. They measure the doctorates awarded compared to the undergraduate degrees awarded. So the more doctorates, the better. Also doctorates awarded per academic staff and institutional income per academic staff. Research was another 30% of the ranking. There's another reputation survey, and we're looking at research income per academic staff and publications per academic staff. Citations gets its own category, which is trying to measure the impact of those citations. Sorry, this should say international outlook. This category measures the proportion of international students, international academic staff, and international co-authorship at the university. And finally, industry income, which measures the research income from industry and commerce. So from outside of the university, coming in from the private sector. So looking at the other system, the ARWU rankings, if we recall, there were 4 categories in this one. Quality of education makes up 10% of the ranking system. And this is measured with just one category. It's the total number of alumni who are winning Nobel Prizes and Fields medals. Quality of faculty, which makes up 40%, is measured with the staff, the faculty winning Nobel Prizes and field medals, and also by trying to measure the highly cited researchers at the university. And it's important to know that those prizes are, particularly the Nobel Prizes, are only in physics, chemistry, medicine, mathematics, and economics, which leaves out a couple of the Nobel Prize categories that might be important to us. Another 40% went to research output, and that is measured by papers published in Nature and Science, which are 2 very prestigious academic journals, and also papers indexed in a science and social science citations index. And then a 10% weighting to per capita performance, which is measured by the per capita academic performance of an institution. So a little bit kind of murky of a category there. But when we think about the differences here between these 2 ranking systems, when we get down to this level, we can start to see what is really determining the numbers that you're seeing on the ranking system. And then we can start to think about whether or not the information that is included in that ranking is actually important in making our university decision when we're looking at US universities. Equally important, I think, to considering what ranking systems do include is to consider what they exclude. Rankings frequently may exclude some things that are important to you. And as we went through the last 2 slides, there may have been things that you were thinking about that have been important to you when considering US universities that you may not have seen represented there. So there are some things that commonly are not measured by the large ranking systems. So these are things like student debt, right? So maybe students incur a large amount of debt to go to a US university. You know, it's no secret that US universities are expensive. That frequently is not included in any ranking systems. You often won't see measures of graduate income. So graduates from that university, what sort of salaries are they commanding after graduation? And how does that compare to their peer universities? The graduation rate is often not included. So students who attend that university, are they actually staying and finishing their degrees? And are they doing it in a timely manner? That might be important for you to consider. Retention rate, which is similar to what I just talked about, are students continuing once they start at that university? Non-English publications are frequently not included in these ranking systems. You know, there's a great deal of research that goes on around the world that is not done in English. And these are not frequently represented in these ranking systems. So one important thing to consider that may or may not be important to you to think about. Community impact is not usually represented in these ranking systems. So universities are large frequently in the US, and they have an impact on their community through their presence, through their the internships that students are doing, through the outreach initiatives, through the research that's happening, all of these different ways. Universities can have positive and negative impacts on their communities, I think. And that is often not represented in the ranking systems. Actual student experience, and this I think is a really important one to think about. The ranking systems that we just looked at probably did not provide much information about what it's like to be a student on that campus on a day-to-day level. And those things are frequently not represented in ranking systems. Internship availability might be important to you. Measures of equity. So are the opportunities at that university available to everyone? Are universities taking steps to make sure that that's the case? You frequently won't see that included in ranking systems. And scholarship or funding availability. It may be important to you to consider what level of funding students are getting in attending that university, how competitive that funding is. Those questions are frequently very important for international students, and you won't usually see that represented in the ranking systems that you're looking at. So as you think about these rankings, I hope that you start to dig into what they're telling you, but at the same time, try to be thinking about what it's not telling you. What things are important to you that you are not seeing represented by those numbers? So with all of that information, how should we use ranking systems? Like I said at the beginning, I think rankings can be really helpful. It does help us to conceptualize in some way and compare universities in the US when students are very far away, when there's an information disadvantage, and when there are many, many universities to be comparing. So they certainly can tell us something, but I think they should probably be a starting point, not an end point for decision making. So they're great for getting a quick bit of information about something at the university, but they're not going to tell you everything that you need to know to consider whether or not that university is a good fit for you personally and for your goals, be that academically or in your career. So you have to understand, I think, or have to try to understand what a ranking is measuring, which we've tried to dig into a little bit here, and what that means for you, because each person looking at a US university, I think, is a little bit different and is in a different situation, probably has different goals and interests. So that means that ranking systems can't be used equally across individuals either. So it's important to think about what you need and what the ranking system is or is not telling you about whether the university can meet those needs. So I'd like to talk about a couple of common pitfalls or mistakes that people frequently make when thinking about or looking at ranking systems. And hopefully thinking about these couple of common errors will help you to avoid them when you see university rankings in the future. The first is what I'm calling bunching. And it's something to be aware of. And bunching, as I call it, is when there might be very little difference between university rankings when they are close together on a list. So in practice, that means that it might be impossible to actually discern any differences between universities that are close together in the rankings. And to give you a real world example, I took one of the common ranking systems and I pulled 4 of them who were in the top 10 that were ranked kind of close together. And I looked at what the actual differences in the scores in the categories that made up the ranking were. So we had 5 categories in this particular ranking system: overall score, academic reputation, employer reputation, faculty to student ratio, and citations per faculty. Overall score, we can see varied just a little bit. So not a big difference between the 4 of them in this kind of small group. Academic reputation, employer reputation, and faculty to student ratio, there was no difference in the ranking system. So according to that ranking system, they all score the same in those categories. We do see some difference a little bit in citations per faculty. So we can start to see maybe a little bit of difference between those universities there. But I think this is a good example of how universities that are close together in that ranking system, whether it's in the top 10 or somewhere else in the ranking system, probably are scoring very similarly in all of those ranking measures. And so there might not be a big difference in terms of what the ranking system is telling you between schools that are grouped close together in a ranking system. The second pitfall is ignoring the broader landscape. Contextualizing rankings is really important for understanding them, like incredibly important. A rank, I think, can only be understood as part of the broader landscape. So by itself, a ranking number is not telling you much until you start to understand the context in which that ranking is occurring. So in practice, to take the US as an example, there are about 4,500 colleges and universities in the US. And of course, there are many, many more all around the world that you could consider. If we look at a US only ranking and a school is number 250 in that ranking, that means they are still in the top 5% of US universities. A school ranked number 500 would still be in the top 11%, so pretty good. And a school ranked 1,500 would still be in the top 1/3 of universities in the US. So we start to see that with so many universities, and if we expand this globally, of course, the numbers increase massively. It becomes important to understand the landscape and the context of how the ranking system, or how and where the ranking system is being developed, to understand that number that you're thinking about. And number 3, pitfall number 3, is ignoring needs or desires. I think that rankings may not give you information about what's actually important to you. And in order to make them useful, you need to determine what you value and which schools can provide that. We looked at 2 of the ranking systems and started to peel back some of those layers. I hope that as we did that, you were able to think a little bit about what is important to you, what is not important to you, and what those ranking systems may be telling you in either of those situations. Now, to give you a real life example of that, I took characteristics from 2 students with whom I have worked. One is interested in biology, right? They know they want to study biology. And they know they want to do academic research. That is really important for them in selecting their university. They also have an unlimited budget. So they're fortunate that money is not going to be an object for them in their university search. And the thing that they care most about, because they want to do academic research, is the lab facility at that university. A student too, who is also looking for a US university, wants to study psychology. They really want good internships, right? They're not so interested in academic research, but they want to have opportunities to work outside of the university, to develop their resume, and to be preparing themselves for whatever their career path might be after graduation. They do have a little bit more limited financial resources, so it's important for them to be thinking about funding and scholarships. And for them, what is most important is a strong support system, right? So maybe they're looking for a school with lots of students who are from the same place as them, or speak the same language, or have strong mental health support or academic support. They're really looking for that sense of community on that campus. And so with this just quick snapshot of these two students, the question that I would pose to you is, how should each of these students use rankings differently? And I'm not going to answer that question for you, but I think with all of the information that we've covered today, you now have the tools to think through that question and to understand how students, including yourself, might want to use rankings differently depending on their situation. So just a few final thoughts for you. Rankings can be useful, I think, but the information that they provide is limited. They're not telling you everything about a university. They're not comparing every single facet of a university to every single characteristic of another university. So they are limited in the information that they're providing you. And because of that, it's important to think carefully about what rankings are telling you. The information that a ranking system is providing you might not be the information that's important to you in making a decision about a US university. And always, I think it's important to keep your interests, your needs, and your desires at the heart of your decision. So be thinking about those things every time you see a ranking system or the rank of a university. Ask yourself, is this actually telling me anything about the things that I think are important for my experience at that university, my goals at that university, and beyond? And finally, ask lots of questions. When you talk with or meet admissions representatives from US universities or elsewhere, it's common for them to talk about their rankings. You'll probably see it on their website or in their brochure. Ask questions about those. It is completely okay to ask an admissions officer what that ranking means, or where it comes from, or how it was developed. In my opinion, admissions representatives should be able to answer those sort of questions for you. And those answers can be very important for making your decision to go to a US university. So with that, that brings me to the end of what I had for you today. There is some contact information up here on the screen. If you're interested in learning more about my university, Boise State University, or connecting with us directly, you're welcome to do that. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram and on our website. You can also scan this QR code that will take you to a page that will show you some other ways to connect with us if you want to schedule a meeting with us or join an event, something like that. We would love to talk to you about ranking systems or Boise State or anything else that you have questions about as you consider a US university. And you'll also see the contact information for Education USA Qatar, who hosted this session, and I'm really grateful for having the opportunity to come and talk with you all today. Thanks so much to Education USA for hosting me. It was lovely to be able to do this. And at this point, I think we can open it up to any questions that there might be.
Thank you, Brian. I just found that fascinating. Really, when you talked about sort of peeling back the layers of what lies beneath the actual how those rankings are, what they're built on. And I was the one, what was it, the professors and how many Nobel Prizes they've won. And I'm thinking, okay, but can they teach in the classroom? And am I going to enjoy the lecture hall? And so it's maybe maybe that wouldn't be a concern. I want to make sure that I can be engaged in the classroom. So, really thinking about what's important to you as a student, those extracurricular activities, what else is happening on campus, so many things to think about. So I just found that fascinating when the way it those minutia sort of things that seem like might not be so important to students. Yes, I think about internships, about the support that's available on campus, English language support for international students. Yeah, just great. I just found that very helpful. We have one question here from a student who's a 10th grader, and he or she says, I'm trying to learn what the rankings mean as I will be beginning my university long listing, maybe short listing soon or long listing soon. So if you're in high school and you're starting to look, what advice, just like how do they, keep one eye on the rankings, but what's your advice to this student?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think first I would say that it's really hard, to choose a U.S. university or to even look at U.S. universities. There's just so many, and there's so many different things that they offer. My recommendation to students is always to start by trying to think about what they want or what they need. So what do you want to study? And maybe you're not sure exactly, but kind of generally, do you want to be a student in the sciences, or do you want to go and study in the humanities? Even a broad idea can be helpful. Thinking about maybe some of the resources or opportunities that are important to you on campus. And then even starting with things like the location of the university. Is it really important to you that you're in a big city? Do you want to be somewhere a little bit quieter in the US? Do you want somewhere that has great outdoor activities or lots of museums or whatever the case may be? I think that can help to start to narrow down that list pretty significantly right away.
Yeah, and I think, taking into consideration cost. Some of those top ranking universities are some of the most expensive universities in the United States. And there are so many excellent institutions that are much more affordable. So, you have to be practical and realistic too, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And then once you have that sort of practical list or long list based upon that, I think the rankings might be helpful in understanding something about them, but definitely look at what they're telling you. That I think that number is not so important unless you understand what it's telling you. And then I always recommend that students reach out directly to the universities. There are lots of people like me at other universities that really our job is to answer questions. And so if you can't get the information that you're looking for from an outside resource or from our website, send us an email, give us a call. Most universities have Facebook pages and WhatsApp that you can contact them or whatever it might be. Use that resource, I think, and try to get that information even directly through the university. We're always happy to talk to you and should be able to answer your questions about pretty much anything that you're thinking about.
I appreciate hearing that, because I think it is important for students when when they're really interested in a university, to take that step and reach out and speak with someone from the institution to have a better understanding of the college or university. We have a question about graduate school rankings. I would imagine it's very similar, but is there anything different that you would say about graduate school rankings as opposed to undergraduate school rankings?
Yeah, I would say it's very similar. I think for graduate students, as we saw, a lot of the ranking systems, and I know we only looked at two, but this is common across many of them, that research is a huge part of those ranking systems. So for graduate students, if you are going on to a doctoral program and research is going to be a major focus, that might be useful or more useful in understanding some of what you're looking for. It's still not going to give you information about your experience on campus or some of the other opportunities that might be available to you. And I would still advise it to be used with caution and with some understanding of what it's telling you, because ultimately, especially as a graduate student, what really becomes important, I think, is whether or not the program you're looking at is a good match for your research interests. Maybe you're looking at computer science, and you have a specific research interest within that. Not all programs are going to offer that or do that as well as some other programs may. So I think they can be useful for getting a sense of the level of research and the impact of research that's happening, but to really understand whether it's a good fit and whether you'll find faculty that are doing things that are of interest to you. I would give a similar response that you need to start to dig into the information at that university, send them an email, give them a call, really kind of understand if it's a match with what you want.
That's great guidance. We have a few people that have joined us here in the Zoom platform, and I wonder if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask Brian. Please do put them in the chat box or raise your hand, and we'd love to hear from you. Anybody? Asil, do you have any questions? Brian, do you want to? We can stop the sharing of the screen, and we can open it up a little bit. There we go. Let's see. I think Asil
No,
is.
thanks. All is okay, but maybe if you would like to talk a little bit about the fair, just
Yeah, for
some
sure.
notes. So
yeah, I will put the oh, you have it. Okay. I was just going to grab that. Thank you, Asil. So we have our virtual university, our Education USA Qatar 2021 virtual university fair coming up on April 6th and 7th. We anticipate having about 50 US colleges and universities join us for that fair. The timing will be from 4 to 8 p.m. Qatar time. And we will be having some individual sessions, some webinars, some informational sessions for students, parents, and school counselors during the fair. So we're hoping that you will join us and you'll take the opportunity to actually speak directly with admissions officers from different colleges and universities and ask all those important questions directly to the institutions. Brian, do you have any guidance as somebody who as a participant in a virtual fair or presenter in a virtual fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been fortunate to do many in-person and lately virtual events with students. I would say it's really helpful to prepare a bit in advance if you know what universities are coming or you know what you're interested in. Kind of thinking through some of the information that you want to get from the universities can be helpful in understanding what questions you might want to ask. And as far as advice in the event, I would say don't be shy. University reps are there and want to talk to you.
That's so important because it's a little bit awkward for the students because they're not really sure so how to approach unless they have a very keen idea. And a lot of them don't yet. They're maybe in 10th grade and just starting to think about universities and they're not sure what to ask. So to provide guidance around that. Well, we are going to be doing some information sessions prior to the fair to help to suggest some questions for students to explore as they're approaching the virtual booths, and hopefully we'll get good participation. Yeah.
And if I may add something,
Yeah.
so thank you so much, Brian. I really learned a lot, in fact, about your presentation.
Wow.
I learned so much about ranking and the system and how does it take, and also something for students who are willing to take part in our virtual fair. So there would be even bilingual people who speak Arabic and English. They would help you if you have any difficulties with English. I would be there. Some of our colleagues will be there. So even if you are reluctant to talk in English with representatives from US universities or with our team, so language wouldn't be a barrier. But of course, if you plan to go to the States, we really encourage you to improve your English language skills because everything will be in English. We hope that you really benefited from this session, and there would be lots of representatives in the fair. So we hope that the fair would be an opportunity for you to get in touch with different universities, get to know about their own programs, and get prepared. And don't hesitate to ask. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Asil. And
Thank
thank you,
you.
Brian. I just found it fascinating when you really dig under and see exactly how those ratings, and because some of it you think is subjective, but they try to make it all measurable. And those, I don't know, it's very interesting. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me. I hope it was useful and interesting, and I hope it will be useful for students who are thinking about that in the future. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.